The presence of God attracts people to you. It draws people to you. That's what the presence does. And the presence of God is what will separate your house from everybody else. The presence of God will separate your children from other people. The presence of God will separate your business and your career and your marriage from the marriage of everybody else. It's the presence of God. Because the presence of God will hold everything together that you cannot hold. Now, when you're in the presence of God, doors open for you. You don't have to ask for doors to open. Because His presence is there, doors will open. So if you're looking for what is going to set you apart this year, it is you being in the presence of God. And you may ask, what do I go to do? Child of God, when you get into the presence of God, the Holy Spirit will lead you what you should do. You don't have to cram what you have to do in His presence. You just must have the willingness to spend time. To spend time in His presence. And when you spend that time, every day will be different. The presence of God will watch over you. The presence of God is where your needs will be supplied. In the presence of God is where astounding miracles will happen. But it is something you must do every day. If you can afford to eat food every day, you can afford to give Him time every day. And if you will give Him time, if only you will give Him time, by this time next year, you'll be singing a different song. Now you realize that everything that had been impossible, all of a sudden becomes possible. The presence of God. It will set you apart. And you will be able to speak like David, that though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And child of God, the presence of God is real. The presence of Jesus is real. And as you spend time with Him every day, you begin to hear His voice with absolute clarity. Absolute clarity. You begin to hear Him direct you. He will teach you how to worship in His presence. And you will discover that in His presence there is fullness of joy. There is a peace that comes to your spirit that you cannot quantify. And then you'll wonder, how did my sicknesses disappear? How did this problem disappear? And then all of a sudden you discover that you become so quiet. You don't complain anymore. You don't get easily angered or easily agitated. Why? It's just a presence. It's just a presence. And in that presence, I am telling you, when you begin to draw close to God, like He says in James 4:8, as you begin to draw close to Him, He begins to draw close to you. Then your prayer life changes. Now you're praying with absolute confidence. And you're so certain of tomorrow. Now while today you may have fear of what's going to happen to you tomorrow, there is a holy confidence that is birthed in you when you're in His presence. And by the way, when you're spending time in His presence, you don't need anybody praying for you. You don't need anyone laying hands on you. Why? Because you are spending time with Jesus. So the presence of God is what your marriage needs. The presence presence. The presence. Because you have to understand that God knows your destiny from the way it starts to where it ends. He knows the dreams that you have. He knows every challenge. He knows every problem. He just knows how big it is. He knows. He knows how big it is. He knows where it started from. And all he's waiting for is just you to be able to give him time, just to be in his presence. And when you spend time in his presence, all the things begin to fall in place. Your dreams begin to fall in place. But when you're not in the presence of God, your whole world seems to be collapsing. And you're asking yourself a question. I've prayed for so long. I've done everything right. And yet God is just waiting for you. Just to come into his presence. Then everything begins to fall in place. Everything. Your destiny, your career, everything about you begins to take on a shape that you didn't think it would take on.